Submit. It's setting up for the stream. I think I have the picture. Ooh, you got more people joining. All right. I'm gonna let the video exist. Submit. It's setting up for the stream. I hate that with a passion. I'm gonna let the video loop 2 more times, Craig, to allow people to join on some more, and then get the link shared.
Cool.
Yes. Copy. Facebook.
So are you able to give me like permissions to share my screen? Because right now it says disabled.
I will do all of that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting it all set up, but I will make sure that you have all those permissions.
No worries. How's everyone doing?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good. Got this lecture done, so I feel good about that. Now I just have to fit it in. I hear that, Neon. I also went to bed too late and got up too early. Such is life.
I learned a lot about them today during our group check-in, and I don't know if it's good or bad yet. I've not decided.
It's okay. It's much better than going to bed at 6 in the morning. I'll tell you that much.
Okay.
Oof. All right. So you're right. You need to sort of fix your sleep schedule.
I mean, is it still fine though? I mean, I'm going to bed at like 3. It's better. It's better. That's all that matters.
All right. The link is shared. Greg, I don't know if you want to also share it for your respective folks.
I don't post much on Facebook.
No worries. I just wanted to keep that in mind. I'm going to share it to the groups real quick, and we will get started. I will do the things where you can do the things. Group.
I have the big, like, am I being, like, too braggadocious or something if I'm like, hey, here's me giving this thing?
Definitely not being braggadocious. How much work did you put into doing this, Greg? That's not braggadocious. That's just sharing what you have done as a fact.
Fair enough.
Okay. To a group. High school policy. Live stream about to get started. Post. All right. One more to a group. College policy debate. Live stream about to started. Go. Post. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna do this one more time, and then I'm going to, while that's happening, give you the permissions, Greg. Participants. Stop share. I'm gonna make you the host. I think that's gonna be what's gonna allow you to share your screen.
Cool.
Okay, but I'm gonna pin your video. And then make post.
Okay. Let me give this a shot.
Did that work?
Yes, I can do it now.
Perfect.
I'm gonna click this and see if it shows up. I will want to share sound. I will want to optimize for a video clip. Okay, people see this now? I don't see you, so yeah, I need the verbal confirmation now. Okay, cool. I'm trying to just get a bearing on all this. Okay, so I can annotate remote control. Okay, got it. Oh, and then there's all of you. Okay, cool. Wonderful. All right, are we set to go, Jasmine?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so this one's going to go a little bit speedy. So for those of you that want to put your video on just so that I can visually see whether I'm going too fast or anything, that'd be helpful. Just even a couple of you. All right, and also just bear in mind I have the thing that I've written for this kind of on my phone. So if I'm kind of looking down a little bit like that, apologize in advance. I'm going to do my best. We're going to try to cover this in an hour. So welcome. Today we are talking about ethical research on the water topic. So for the past 2 to 3 decades, policy debate has been riven by a number of internal fissures, which have largely centered on the role of the topic as a point of stasis or a starting point from which the community's research and discussions should revolve. So over the course of your time here at the Debate Boutique, you'll be hearing a lot about framework, a lot about topicality, and whether you're already familiar with a lot of these controversies or not, it's important to understand, what's at the base of these disputes. So at their base, this is a disagreement about what types of research debaters should be doing and what relationship that research should have with the resolution. So how many of you, by show of, I guess, thumbs or whatever, have heard of the phrase core of the topic before? That's one. Is there other reactions? Yeah, a couple other folks. Just shout out, what does it typically refer to?
Well, it usually refers to you're doing exactly what the topic says. Like if it says criminal justice reform, it might, example could be death penalty, something like that. Just basically exactly kind of fits within the topic really easily. It's not kind of crazy out of the way.
So it exactly fits within the topic. Yeah, so I would say that typically the core of the topic refers to the set of arguments that is considered reasonably predictable based on the resolution, right? So my next question is, who do you think gets to determine whether an argument is predictable?
Anybody. I mean, usually the judge, but I mean, you might think it's predictable.
Does every judge think about predictability in the same way?
No.
So in a certain way, I hear you, it's almost like a communal process in a certain way. So what I'll say is that traditionally, the definition of the core of the topic claims that whether an argument is predictable or not depends on whether it resembles either a particular expert discourse, something like, sorry. What was that? Oh, got it.
Sorry, Greg, I just wanted to see if we can fix that really quickly, just so.
Just change Sarah to Alex.
Yeah.
Got it. Sorry, real quick. Yeah, so it typically depends on whether it resembles a particular expert discourse. So sort of your example of it's like the question of if you were talking to someone who works in criminal justice, would they think that the death penalty is within it? Wait, there's a weird block on the screen covering some of the words.
Yeah, it keeps shifting.
I think it's the zoom overlay, the thing on the side is probably the cameras.
Is it? Oh, so it's this thing right here. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll just let me probably just,
You can just like drag it down to like the weird like underspace of like.
yeah,
the computer.
exactly. I'll move it if need be. We do this. Sorry for the technical issues. Let's see. It's not the smallest I can make it. Yeah, sort of. Okay. That's fine. Okay. Restart. So whether an argument is predictable typically means that if you ask an expert about it, they'll think that it's within the topic, or whether it is faithful to what the topic framers kind of were intended. But it doesn't always work out this way. For example, on this topic, do you all believe that somebody that studies water policy at a university is always going to be more qualified than an indigenous water protector?
I feel like depending on the type
in a lot of instances, they might be more qualified, right? But I think I'm not discounting academic knowledge either, saying that it's not valuable. But I am kind of pointing to the fact that two different types of sources might approach water policy from two wildly different angles, and what is predictable to one may not always be what is predictable to another. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when debaters oh God, I have to move this again. I'm just going to get rid of this little screen. We'll just have a conversation. When debaters, judges, and coaches define predictability, they're usually making normative arguments about how a topic should be, not merely remarking on how it actually is. Which is not to say that there aren't some agreed upon assumptions between the different perspectives. Both the water policy wonk at a university and the water protector probably that they're agree that they're talking about water rather than fire or whatever else. But this makes clear that what is considered topical or predictable is not simply a matter of one particular expert literature base and its precise definitions of various terms of art in the resolution. Instead, the way we debate about and think about a topic is a product of interpretation, right? Part of the way we interpret is by implicitly deciding who is a credible authority about it, and therefore what is considered to be a relevant mode of topic research. Does that track with people? Cool. Take a sip of water. So, this lecture is going to have three parts. The first is going to be a theory of ethical research as predictable research. So I'm planning on showing you how predictability can be reconceptualized through things like personal experience, structural analysis, or metaphorical deconstruction. This should give you some examples for both how to critique instrumental readings of the resolution that are sometimes reified through framework, and for how to ground those critiques in your own alternative conception of the topic. Second, I'm going to give you some tips about the mechanics of research. What are places to look, how to keep up with what you find, etc. And lastly, we'll briefly discuss ways to assess the kind of credibility, quality, and trustworthiness of a piece of research, as well as how to understand and historicize the different connections and critiques that exist between them. And then there'll be an activity. So the first part, in order to find your angle on the topic, it's important to ask yourself a couple questions about how you see the topic imagined, especially in the early stages of its development before we even start debating during the year. So what kind of concerns seem relevant but are often left out of the discussion even before that first tournament? And who gets to make those decisions? The different ways that debaters may debate may answer these questions has tremendous influence on how they perceive the topic as a whole. So for example, on this topic that I'm displaying right now, which was my junior year in college, like fourth year, it was, the topic was colloquially referred to by most policy-leaning debaters as the National Health Insurance, or NHI, topic. But a lot of the K debaters, just like even colloquially, referred to it as the health care topic, And that might be like kind of a trivial distinction, but it trickled down into the way that they actually debated about it too, where policy teams were by and large talking about the economics of health access, while a lot of K teams were more interested in the violent disparities of care and the potential for radical self and or communal care. So on a topic that is like as big as water and as intimately personal as it is, what traditional definitions of predictability do is abstract the topic's alleged core or its nexus point away from the diverse experiences that a given debater might have with water policy or just with water, in favor of a sterilized, professionalized topic about the state's protection of water resources. So to explore this, I've grouped some of the ways of approaching the topic into 3 categories. Like I said, personal experience, structural analysis, and metaphorical deconstruction. Each of these overlapping frames provides a rubric for how K debaters, in general, when thinking about a topic, approach it from an angle that is different from the instrumental version, and how that way that they approach the topic can itself also be understood as predictable. So these are not only ways that these are not like the only ways that you can kind of group each of these ways of thinking about the topic, but they're rough sketches that hopefully will provide you some tools, both for thinking about how to write your own affirmatives, how to defend your affirmative against framework, and if you're someone who's a 2N, how to potentially think about what other apps you might have to prepare to negate. So first part, we're going to talk about personal experience. I'd be remiss not to credit the Louisville Project in the mid-2000s with the popularization not only of the use of personal experience in debate, but more importantly, a theory of personal experience in debate, which was their 3-tiered process, which included personal experience, organic intellectuals, and academic intellectuals. And there should be a ton of times if you are interested in seeing some of those early videos of them debate, we can definitely find a way to do that because I have a couple of those saved on my computer. But it was an early attempt to reimagine a more equitable and ethical model of research that could foster a more diverse type of participation within debate. On this topic, everyone has an experience with water. It inevitably makes up a daily part of our lives, but not everyone has access to it in the same way. So one of the more obvious ways that this can be seen is the impact of water privatization on Black, Brown, and low-income communities. I'll briefly go through a couple of the cities where some of these impacts are being seen. So Baltimore is an interesting case because it represents both the heights of the water crisis as well as holding some possible hopeful signs, at least in comparison to some other cities. So it might be a little bit hard to see because the report that I got this from was actually fairly blurry. Let me see what people are saying in the chat. Yeah, that's your city, exactly. Yeah. So what you're essentially, you can't see the numbers that are in the green circles because the article I took it from was really blurry, but the size of the green circles is supposed to represent the percentage of median income that the given family, on average pays in that particular census block. And notably, with few exceptions, the vast majority of the census blocks that pay the most for their water are cited predominantly in Black census blocks. So thanks to grassroots, efforts of progressive organizers within the city, it was one of the first cities to ban the privatization of water, but efforts to get a public system off the ground have stalled throughout most of 2020 and are now only at this moment in Brandon Scott's new administration starting to be dealt with in some way. And that's not even perfect because there's already a number of critiques of his administration. So the underlying question here that seems relevant to the topic is the idea that water is a resource that can be privatized and sold. And we'll be talking about this a lot, rather than it being a publicly protected good or a human right that is guaranteed by the state. So another example of this is Detroit, kind of coterminously with the very popularized Flint water crisis. The Water Authority of Detroit started rolling through towns in large red trucks and turning off the water of households that couldn't pay water debts, which were, as you can imagine, predominantly Black and brown. At the same time, white parts of the city framed these issues as if those residents who were victims to those shutoffs deserved their own thirst. And they invoked images of things like the welfare queen, other kind of anti-Black images and rhetoric in order to do this. There are other examples as well. So for example, in California, that's supposed liberal bastion of progressivism. It is one of the only states that has a right to water bill on the books that says that everyone should have an access to water, but it has absolutely no enforcement teeth. So in Los Angeles County, your zip code largely determines what your water bill will be. What neighborhood you live in determines whether you pay as low as $200 a month or as high as $1,500 a month. And it's kind of a patchwork of different corporations that all sell water to you because it's still a privatized system. It's a similar story in San Diego, where essentially safety standards are notably suboptimal for poorer communities. Am I going too fast at all? Is this all right mostly? Yeah, check this. Good so far? I want to make sure we're tracking. Pittsburgh's water crisis, was very similar to Flint, both because it faced similar levels of high lead toxicity and because the same exact company, Veolia, was contracted to both cities. So the point of all of these examples is that it's very possible for you to connect this topic, like Jasmine is saying, to your local politics of whatever town or city you live in, and to a broader process of racial capitalism, where one's ability to satisfy one's thirst is devolved to the market and is cut across racial lines. So, personal experiences with water are not restricted simply to thirst or maintaining one's bodily needs and shouldn't only be thought about in terms of these kind of baseline inequalities. For a number of indigenous communities, water and bodies of water hold extraordinary religious, spiritual, and communal significance. So, for example, I'll be pointing to this author a lot because I think that she's one of the best K authors on this topic. But Kutcher Risling Baldy is an enrolled member of the Hoopa Valley tribe and the chair of the Department of Native American Studies at Humboldt State University. And she discusses how ritual bathing in the river is a vital coming of age ceremony for young Hoopa women. And she explains how this makes various government infrastructure projects, particularly dams, which you're going to hear a lot about, especially from like hedge teams or teams that talk about naval power or economics. How dams are not only a form of physical deprivation, i.e. they prevent you from drinking the water that you need to, and you get sick, which is also terrible, but it's also a form of spiritual and cultural genocide that infringes on indigenous people's ability to pray and engage in community with one another. So again, I would really encourage you to look into her work, and we'll definitely be talking about her later as well. So this segues pretty well into our second perspective, which is structural analysis. The point here is that disparities in water access or ways that water is utilized as a weapon can help shape analysis about how power works in general, not just how water is distributed, but it points to broader disparities that exist. So this also means understanding how water figures within history. How did the crossing of water enable settler colonialism? How the Middle Passage thrived on what the Diane Leong evidence in one of the critical 1ACs that you'll have access to in the next couple of days calls an ecology of thirst, and how a number of thriving Black towns and communities were destroyed to create reservoirs and lakes, including Oscarville, which was flooded to create Lake Lanier in Georgia, York Hill, which was flooded to create the Central Park Reservoir in Central Park, New York, and over 100 other towns, which were Black communities that have become lakes, and how that is now something that we can see happening in Silwa, Palestine, where a number of communities are being cleared from their homes so that a park can be built that would be owned by Israel. So these are kind of international connections. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But the point of this is that water can give us insight into how power operates, like I was talking about a second ago. So I think the one place where this relationship is demonstrated most clearly is along the Line 3 tar sands pipeline in Minnesota, where indigenous Ojibwe water protectors are rising up against a project which threatens to poison 1/5 of the world's fresh water supply. So this is happening right now and is replaying a number of issues that were first seen in Standing Rock in 2016. So if you're asking about like what is the critical kind of nexus point, what is the fight that is happening about this topic, it's this one. It's happening at the moment. It's like literally as we're speaking. So I'm gonna play a clip of one of the water protectors discussing why this issue is so important to her and her family. I'm going to give a content warning because she has a brief reference, not a lengthy description, but just a brief reference to sexual assault. So if you don't want to hear that, you can mute the presentation for about 90 seconds. I'll give you a few seconds to decide, but then we are just going to listen to what she has to say. So if everyone's good, I'm going to do that now.
Pushu, Tabiki Giza, Skijikwe, Nindishnikas, Nagachiwanang, and Dunjiba, Megazida Autumn. My name is Tasia Martineau. I'm 28 years old. I come from the Fond du Lac Reservation, and I stand in opposition of the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline because at home I have 3 beautiful Indigenous daughters and 1 strong son. When corporations like Enbridge build pipelines such as Line 3, Line 4, Line 5, or even energy transfer partners with the Dakota Access Pipeline, the increase of violence against Indigenous women in the communities along these routes increased by 22%. Before that 22% increase, my young daughters already faced the statistics of being 1 in 3. Before the age of 15, 1 in 3 Indigenous women are raped, go missing, or end up murdered by an intimate partner, family member, acquaintance, or friend. You know, when you get these companies who come in with thousands of out-of-state workers in these small communities, oftentimes there are work hiatuses where they're sitting in these hotels with a lot of time and money in their pockets. Some of them are going to go try to find a girl or a boy. It's been statistically proven that these corporations and their workers increase both drug and sex trafficking. You know, these men, they're the risk to my community. They're the, you know, the shadow in the dark. They're the boogeyman beneath the bed. You know, when these white trucks trespass ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe, we have to remain vigilant and watch because oftentimes their eyes are trespassing the bodies of our children. You know, so we're here today exercising our treaty rights, which is per Article 6 of the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. The police here stood down, recognizing that our treaty rights supersede this corporation. And so this camp has gone up where people are swimming in the river, you know, they're hunting, they're fishing, they're gathering, they're doing what's natural for them, you know, and to live in communities such as this, decolonizing and being together with one another in community. You know, it's important that we do those things to recognize, you know, how far we've come as human beings, because as human beings, we're all water. Each and every single one of us is a water carrier. We are 70% water. We carry that water within us, the water that connects us, the water that's around us. Every single one of us is a water protector, and it's our duty to uphold these treaties and be good stewards of this land and ensure that in 100 years, when our grandchildren speak about how we stopped Line 3, they'll be able to stand right here and rice and fish this river. When Enbridge started digging in December, the first place they desecrated was a spot that was very sacred to me that we were calling Grandma's Table. At this spot, I learned how to speak my name so that the ancestors could know me. I learned how to build a fire there where Jim Northrup taught me so that when I travel home, I can do so safely. My children danced around that fire with braids in their hair and ribbon skirts, learning the language that they took from my grandmother. And when Enbridge started digging, that was the first spot they desecrated. And so I was angry. I felt that this corporation had taken something from me. And it's been, you know, everyone I've met on this journey, every single person that I've met, especially, you know, the other Indigenous women in leadership and the, you know, all of the people that who have come, you know, to our call for aid have taught me that as an Indigenous person, I can pray absolutely anywhere. I'm standing in the river where they intend to cross. I got here by coming off of an easement, and I did so in prayer the entire way here. I can pray anywhere, and they cannot take that from me. Law enforcement intends to protect capital, not the people, and unfortunately, many of these officers who have taken oaths to protect the people will protect profits and pipelines more so than human life. I think we've seen something absolutely beautiful with the local sheriff and their interaction with Don Goodwin, where they did stand down and they did recognize Article 6 of the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. You know, and I think that at the end of the day, you know, cops are not your friends. You know, we're not anti-worker, but we need people to recognize that the jobs that they're doing is harming Indigenous people. It's been harming Indigenous people for generations. So we need to be moving away from our fossil fuel addiction. We need to be moving towards a just transition. We need to understand that we are in the time of the 7th fire. And in order for us to move forward into the 8th fire, a world of peace and prosperity, we need to go back. We need to move away from all of the comforts and the luxuries that we have today and be willing to be uncomfortable so that one day our children and their children after them can continue to live this life in a good way, can continue to gather wild rice, gather berries, hunt the deer in this area, fish these rivers. If we don't do that, none of us will be here long. It's not an Indigenous fight. We are literally in the fight for humanity. Line 3 is the dying gasps of the oil industry, and they know it, and that's why they're so desperate. They are screaming, they are terrified, and all of that noise means nothing in the face of the voice of our ancestors calling out for us to wake up and remember. If you weren't at Standing Rock, and that's a regret in your heart, you should get here. You know, you as an individual are everything good that your ancestors brought to this place. And we need you here on the front line to stand with us today for a future for your grandchildren too.
Yeah, so there's a lot that she offered there. I think that one of the biggest things is sort of what I'm trying to illustrate, that like, you know, this isn't just a fight over water, right? This is a fight against climate destruction, against oil companies. Right. This is a fight against, you know, police brutality, right? So there are other solidarity actions that exist besides literally traveling to the pipeline site, which does stretch across a couple states. For instance, just the other day in Massachusetts, a group of water protectors did a sit-in one of Enbridge's offices, demanding that the pipeline be halted. In any case, this is, like I said, probably the most currently relevant water-related controversy, at least as it pertains to Southern colonialism and environmental protection. So every debater on this topic should be keeping up to date with it. And if you want more information, some of the sources that have been great that I've seen are Democracy Now!, More Perfect Union, and then here we see Unicorn Riot, which does a great job in Minnesota in general. So moving on, the final perspective that we're going to be looking at briefly is the notion of water as a metaphor. So metaphorical deconstruction means taking apart the language of the resolution in order to reveal new meanings and uncover what has been excluded by the resolutional text. It helps you anchor your affirmative in a textual critique of the topic, which is important because that's how you win kind of like critiques of their interpretation, ways of making it so they can't develop topical versions of the AF through an instrumental model on framework, right? These are the different ways that you can use these other two approaches as well, right? So you should still think through history. You should still think through structures of power and personal experience and how, you know, all these different questions, but that you can then ground that within a broader textual critique. Purely metaphorical interpretations are harder to defend, I would argue, versus ones that combine metaphor with structure, with history, and with experience. So for instance, one could just say that like water implies fluidity and fluidity is flux, so therefore like delusion becoming or some other like, you know, kind of homo buzzword is like the core of the topic. And I think that's like a lot less persuasive than like grounding the potential for like water's fluidity or whatever in the lived experience of indigenous tribes or the structural disparities of thirst experienced by Black people, etc. So with this topic, what do we think, what do you all think now that we've had some time? I'll give you a chance to chime back in. are some of the key parts of the resolutional text that would be subject to critique? Like, what words would you pick on?
Maybe protection.
Protection, yeah. Specifically, I'd say the fact that it's protection, it's the state's protection, right? I think that's important. Let's hear from someone we haven't heard from before. Don't make me just like call on someone. Oh, wow. Thunder. Cool. Let's see who's in the chat. Someone said protection. Anything else? Any other ideas?
Maybe just like a critique of like federal government in general.
Sure. UFSFG. Luke, I think I saw your hand up.
Maybe the word resource.
The word resource, awesome. So yeah, we'll talk about each of these, right? So I think resources is probably the core distinction between critical and policy versions of the topic. We'll get to the others as well. So Navajo scholar Andrew Curley has a chapter called Resources. I'm gonna put this away so folks can see everything again. Called Resources is Just Another Word for Colonialism. It's related to the commodification of water that we discussed earlier. It kind of implies an anthropocentric conception of agency, where water is a passive object that can be commodified and that humans use rather than an actor in its own right. So other indigenous scholars and water protectors have talked about replacing the framework of water as resource with the framework of water as relative, as a way of critiquing this kind of Eurocentric framework. So, you know, the USFG's protection, state protection, it kind of distinguishes, like, it kind of says that like water protection on the ground through direct action is excluded kind of from like at least a fiated model, right? You can respond to that with like a law or something the state does, but you're not allowed to defend the act of putting your body on the line, which is what, as we just heard in that previous clip, is kind of what it's all about in a certain degree. Those kinds of strategies are kind of precluded from the beginning. And then the one that I don't know if people mentioned is in the United States is another one that I think is really interesting. We can only discuss water when we accede to the colonial borders of the nation state as it exists. And the thing is that rivers don't abide by these borders. You know, tribes that have existed way longer than settlers have don't necessarily abide by these borders, or at least are drastically harmed by them. Neither do lakes, neither do oceans. In fact, water, I think in an interesting way, not only does it point to how power can be used in a violent way, but it also points to how it, like water itself frustrates these types of attempts at these fictional colonial borders, right? Because borders are fictions. They are reinforced by things like walls and things like sentries, but they are ultimately a human imagination that just codifies itself through militaristic force. So this is actually one of the reasons why various Caribbean authors in particular have tried to use metaphors of things like the sea in order to challenge the colonial fragmentation of Caribbean islands. So one example of that would be someone like Edouard Glissant, or to a lesser extent, Kamau Brathwaite, right? Both of these were theorists of the Caribbean that talked about Caribbean Black relationality through notions of fluidity, and oftentimes through critiques of the imperialism of dividing up the Caribbean, dividing up the world from each other into discrete parts. One sec. I have to get to the next part of the lecture. Hold on. One quick sec. In order to keep going, I gotta save this. Resend it to myself real quick. Sorry for the interruption. We'll get right back on track in a second. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. All set now. So now that we've talked about for a while the type of questions that you can ask about the resolution, we're going to address real quick the actual research process itself. In other words, where do you search? What are you ultimately looking for? So we're going to go over a few strategies for that. So home run searches just generally refers to what you all probably do anyway in terms of using Google. It just means like you end up trying to find the one thing that you search without using any search operators or without just like at the beginning of the topic, you're like, I don't know, water and colonialism or water and anti-Blackness or water and queer theory or whatever. And this usually brings you articles that aren't the most useful for cards, but it will give you an insight into just like a foundation for further research down the line and that will allow you to understand the core controversies. So in general, I think that you want to familiarize yourself, if you're not already, with Google Scholar, because that's where you're going to find a lot of the more qualified and comprehensive evidence. The same thing as if you have a local university that gives you access to its databases. Eventually, once you're in college, same deal. If you have a coach that has access to one of those things because they're in grad school or something like that. Similarly, libraries and books are still your best friend. It's oftentimes like you can learn more than you would online by just like leaving your phone and computer at home and just burying yourself in the stacks for a few hours. So at the same time, academic research is very much gate-kept, and I want to make this as like a caveat. It's much more gate-kept than some other sources you'll find online, which can be both good and bad. It means that you won't get like random like conservative like conspiracy theory screeds, but at the same time, it means that you will probably be taught, like on balance, the academic base is much more white, much more like cis men, etc. So there are voices that sometimes do get left out of the discussion in the context of purely academic sources, and that should always be kind of kept in mind. At the same time, you should always scrutinize your sources, no matter where they come from. So when searching online, you want to be familiar with how each search engine uses Boolean operators. I'll talk about the Google ones real quick. So if you want an exact phrase that you're searching on Google, like water resource protection, rather than water resource protection somewhere in the article, you just put it in quotes. Same thing as if you want water resource protection, like and settler colonialism, put both of those in quotes with a plus sign in between them, and it will search for both of them at the same time rather than just either of them. Same deal with a minus sign. If you put a minus sign right before a word or a phrase that keeps like finding like the wrong results, like I don't know if there's like a band that happens to have a name that's like very similar to what you're searching, or just like some other irrelevant stuff that keeps clogging up your searches, that's one way to clean them up. When searching online, you want to also be utilizing terms of art. Terms of art in general refer to just specific phrases or references to events or people or whatever. They can really be anything so long as they point to their usage in a specific literature base, i.e., you can kind of know that you'll be talking about in the frame of like water public policy when you use a phrase like water resource protection in quotes as a term of art. Is that mostly tracking with some folks? Does that in a similar context, if you're looking for articles about, that are specifically about indigenous conceptions of violence, like settler colonialism is a term of art that is still relatively confined to that field. Whereas if you just search something like colonialism, you're going to get like a bunch of random like British economics journals from like the 1700s when they still thought that like, oh yeah, this was great. Or you'll get a bunch of people like trying to talk about like the history of decolonization in the 50s as like an IR term. And like those things are much less useful. So you should keep a theory, you should keep like a journal or a document that has all of these in it. Generally, you want to be able to use them in order to be able to further hone your searches in very specific directions. So now that you're searching the web and filling up your Chrome browser with a ton of tabs at a time, in my case, hundreds, the next question is, how do you organize everything? So I'd recommend keeping a processing file, which is basically just like any other debate file you have, but it's like not for you reading in debate. It's for like, you cut cards here and you put sites here as before you end up cutting them, and you just use it to store it and organize things. And then when you're done cutting it and you're ready to put it in a file, you move it out of that file if you want to. So this is just generally a way of making sure you don't lose things. So if you have like 3 sites up and like three websites up that you're wanting to cut a card from, and you're just like, I don't like know what I'm not going to do this tonight. Like, either just paste the hyperlinks in there, or even better, just like create the debate type site for it, which we can talk about another point in time. There's also some helpful features from Google Scholar that can help you store research. So for instance, if you all have ever seen the cited by function, if you're clicking on an article, so for example, this is great for finding answer. It refers to all the different other articles that have referenced the one that you're reading. So this is great for finding answers to potential arguments. It's also great for finding topic literature from like a particular theory of power or literature base. So for instance, if you're looking for like an Afro-pessimist take on water policy, right? You can go to Google Scholar, search like Frank Wilderson, Red, White, and Black, and it'll say like cited by like a couple thousand or whatever. You click on that cited by, there'll be like a little bit thing at the top of the screen where it's like, by the search bar, where it's like search only within articles citing this article and citing this book. And that'll be, and then from there, if you search the word water, you won't just get articles about water across the board. You'll get only articles about water that, that reference water from authors that cite Wilderson. And at that point, you're, it's still, you have to do a decent amount of like reading through and figuring out which ones are useful, but you're in a much better spot. You have much less to sift through. You can also use the favorites, which is just like, you can just, next to every single site, there'll be a button to save it to your own like Google Favorites library for Google Scholar, which is just helpful in addition to like a processing file. Bookmark managers are also good, especially for things that aren't just like easy to save like that, especially like, podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever. Both of these are good. Pocket is probably a little bit better. Both are free. Pocket lets you save things on your phone or your computer to read later, usually. And then Toby is a more general like bookmark manager that just has like a very nice visual interface that you can have on your computer. Then you should probably, and it depends how much you're doing, but downloading a citation library manager like Zotero is super useful, especially like once you're writing papers for class and things like that, because it has buttons on it that allow you to essentially like control it allows you to automatically create a bibliography from a number of sources. It lets you create folders to categorize things or little tags, which you can see down here, in order to categorize things. So I have, this is a picture of mine, right? So it has like, we're inside the Afro-pessimism folder. It's organized by date. This is the interview between Wilderson and Tiffany King. Here's the book that it's in. Here's the pages of the book, right? So this can be a really helpful way to just like have an idea of where everything is. This program that we're looking at right now is called Zotero. It's the one listed down here. And it's free. There's other ones that are like it too. I don't remember the name of them right now. I'm perfectly fine using this one though, but they're generally called citation managers. And they're used predominantly by academics, people that write papers a lot. So you see not only like stuff that I cover debate in here, but you also see some stuff that I do for class. That's like the communication studies stuff that I have right there, counterpublics, things like that. I study a lot about accelerationism. There's a big folder for that as well. So once you have a handle on researching and are starting to get a basis of understanding, you have a few sources that you're pretty sure you trust, right? Like I think that you all should be pretty trustworthy of like Dr. Rizlan Baldi that we talked about earlier. You should branch out to less traditional sources. So social media is an awful creation, but it's often pretty useful for this particular thing. You should follow Dr. Rizlan Baldi on Twitter. And I think that you should also follow some of the other like authors that you might typically find on Twitter. And there's a lot of like, interesting back and forth that will happen. You'll be able to notice other people that they talk to frequently, maybe disagreements that certain camps of people have from others. Twitter is probably the best for this. Facebook is for old people, but can be sometimes helpful. I think TikTok is like something else, but like it exists as like, there's definitely some educational tools on there. It's just a lot more decentralized and less like community oriented. Facebook you can use to also ask people to find PDFs if you don't have access to them at times. And like Instagram is actually pretty decent in terms of like visualized resources, especially in relation to like specific events. So if you were interested in like Line 3 protests as they were happening, there's definitely going to be a bunch of like, Instagram infographics that they'll have just like, top talking points and things like that. You should sign up for journal alerts, although not to the degree that I have because it spams your email. But if you have a favorite journal, say for instance, like the Decolonization Journal or the Settler Colonial Studies Journal or the Black Studies Journal, right? These are all ones that exist, right? You can go to the website that posts them, and more times than not, they will have an option for you to input your email and be notified every time a new issue comes out or a new article comes out. Same thing with the same citations function I was talking about earlier. You can not only do like search within cited by, but you can also just be notified every time someone cites red, white, and black, right? Or you can be notified every time someone cites like no future by Edelman for queer theory, right? So these are useful ways of keeping up to date with scholarship, but try to balance it so you don't have like a massively full email. You should contact your authors. You shouldn't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to email them. A lot of their lectures are virtual right now. They're happening online. Sometimes you can ask to attend, or if you have a local university, you can potentially go to it. If you decide to like email them or interview them and read it as like a piece of evidence, be aware, some judges don't think that's appropriate evidence. I disagree with that pretty firmly, and I think like a large part of like the theory and kind of spirit of this lecture is disagreeing with that. But two is that if you want to do this, you have to make sure that the interview or the questions are posted somewhere, that you have the author's permission for it, and that anyone theoretically could find it online if you're going to read it, just for the sake of everyone having access to things. And then you can also find podcasts to update you. There's sometimes some good ones. I'll give the example of the Water Talk podcast, which has an episode with Dr. Rizlan Baldi actually 2 episodes with her on decolonization and water policy, as well as a bunch of other stuff about water and race, water and environmental justice, things like that. So this brings us to the last part of the lecture, which is going to be pretty brief, which is how to grasp the research process as a whole, and how do you determine whether a source that you found is trustworthy. So there's some example, all sources have biases, but there's definitely some example where these biases are more obvious than others. So Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. But even prior to him doing that, the Washington Post, because of its location in DC, had a reputation for being like, if the New York Times is more like pro-corporate or like pro-elite society, the Washington Post was like more pro-Pentagon. It was connected to a lot of insider military sources, and that was kind of the spin that it had on every article came through these. And every paper has its own history like this, but like I'm saying, the fact that Amazon now has a mouthpiece through one of the largest newspapers in the country means that there's like, something there. There are some that are a lot less obvious though. So you all, whether you know it or not, if you have already debated, have probably encountered authors from institutions like these or other think tanks, right? These are your Hedge Solves War authors, your Democracy Solves Things authors, anything that has to do with IR, with international relations, vast majority of impact cards, tons and tons of things, right? These are think tanks that are largely influenced by weapons manufacturers and by arms dealers. In fact, a study by the Foreign Influence Transparency Initiative did a survey of the top 100 of these and found that like nearly all of them are funded at least partially by defense contractors. So this is kind of where things get interesting because a lot of these get prevalent in debate, and a lot of these are places where debaters go after they are done debating, especially the CSIS. Is one where there's like, I can name like 3 or 4 people on staff right now that are former debaters, right? And so, some of these are more obvious than others. The Rand Corporation, for instance, received over $1 billion in 5 years from defense contractors and has a reputation for being very hawkish, very tied up with the military. But others are assumed to be better, but are not. So like the CSIS, like I just mentioned, it has a bunch of former debaters working from it, received $5 million from defense contractors between 2014 and 2019. If you've ever seen, you've definitely seen a card from the outlet Foreign Affairs before, which is controlled, which is a publication from the Council on Foreign Relations, which, if anything I've told you is a surprise at this point, it also received $1 million from weapons manufacturers. So like, what qualities should you be looking for that are not this? On the one hand, it's definitely independence, right? You want, it's definitely hard to find these days because the vast majority because reporting is a dying industry and there's not much money in it. But there are smaller crowdfunded efforts. But on its own, independence is not all that it's cracked up to be. For example, if you've ever heard of websites like, for instance, the website Gray Zone, which is known for publishing at least like nominally anti-imperialist things, it is still like, it doesn't possess the quality of reflexivity because it is ultimately like, it is a mouthpiece for the Syrian Assadist government. And a lot of its reporting is just about like disproving the fact that Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons on his own people. So even though it like has other decent views in some places, it's ultimately like, it is just like a propaganda outlet, just on the other side and not really funded by weapons manufacturers, which isn't better. It's just the flip side of the coin. Reflexivity refers to the one's ability to kind of, is distinguished from objectivity. Objectivity is like a view from nowhere. It's both sides-ism. You have to always tell both sides of the story, which more times than not just means like telling the side of the dominant party and then really ignoring the side of the marginalized. That is a lot. That's not what you're looking for. You want someone who recognizes that they have a bias, and speaks openly about that bias, but also does the work in order to make it so that there are, that there is a degree of, self-criticality, checking on one, like answering potential arguments from the other side in good faith, especially when they're like, critiques from other marginalized populations. And then to a lesser extent, but still a somewhat extent, diversity. This is something that obviously has become kind of neoliberalized to a certain extent because, it's perfectly possible to find like just a conservative person who happens to also be diverse. But in general, you can see effects on this in newsrooms and editorial boards where you will see, people who, or like journal editors, where if the people that are editing are, more likely to be, Arab or Muslim, and they're probably going to be more critical of some of the US's foreign policy in certain ways towards certain countries. If they're someone that is, for instance, like a not cis man, then they're probably going to treat issues that have to deal with like sexual assault more carefully. That's not a guaranteed thing, right? But it does point us in the right direction. So, as a starting point, I've told you a lot about like what not to look for. One place that I would recommend checking out that is just like a pretty decent watchdog organization is called Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, or FAIR. And it's been around for a couple decades. It's pretty good. It's generally like independent takes on foreign policy. They have a podcast that also deals with the news every week and stuff like that. So the other goal that you should be having here is the ability to historicize relationships between authors in different literature bases. So what this essentially means is that you should be able to understand the differences that particular types of theory might have with each other. So for example, Marxists have always had a tension with arguments about identity, and those have been kind of resolved in different ways. There's differences between Black Marxism and Marxist orthodoxy, for instance. In other ways, there's sometimes disputes and sometimes agreements between Black and Native studies. For instance, Afro-pessimism doesn't super have a lot of great overlaps with some aspects of Native studies, but with others, it has had some good conversations and things like that. So it's important to understand the differences here. And then like postmodernism, post-structuralism, again, these are just examples. I'm just trying to talk about how when you're researching something, once you get good at this process, you will eventually be able to kind of understand, it's like, okay, this person cites Baudrillard. That means that this person thinks about the world in XYZ way that is different than someone that cites Deleuze or whatever. And those things are not clear cut, but it's important to kind of over time build your knowledge about these particular controversies and others while you are doing your research. All right, so we have done a lot. I think I actually did just barely fit it in 1 hour. We will do a brief activity. I don't know what Jasmine thinks about whether we should do it here or if we can just have this be like an activity to go. But I have 4 articles that you can pick from, and the goal is you're going to, read or at least skim those articles, find a few terms of art, what you think are terms of art in it, and then use those in order to find another article that will be useful to you on the topic this year. Does anyone have any questions about that or about any of the lecture? This was a lot, I'm sorry. I know that it was quite a bit. In fact, I'm going to stop the screen share. And we're going to go back in here.
I don't hear any questions. So, and if y'all don't, that's fine for now, right? Because like Greg, y'all have access to him and your private research text channels and office hours. If you're not hit with questions now, you'll be hit with questions later. I highly suggest doing this. Sorry, y'all. Life, it just makes you want to react to it. Greg has put the activity in the Discord. I would highly suggest taking it on. You'll have some free time now between your preparation for the SPAR debates, which y'all have been seeing me at you all in the 4-week group chat. So check those out and getting that all scheduled and set up with the consultants. And then I would say do this activity that Greg has set out for y'all and ping us in your respective channels to let us look at what you've done. Because Greg, is the rolling goal and cutting cards from this, or what is
It can be. I think it's just to find another article at least, because I've given them some, just like write down what you think the terms of art are, and then just find another article that is similar or connected to this topic in some way.
And that makes sense to all of you, what the activity is and does? I need some reaction.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, then thank you so much, Greg. This was invaluable. Eva needs
I can repeat it. Yeah. So yeah, it's if you just pull up the, yeah, no big deal. If you just pull up in the 4-week channel the research lecture handout, it has the directions. It's just one, you'll pick one of 4 articles that I already kind of picked out that I think are at least connected to the topic somewhat. You will look for the terms of art that exist within it, and then you will use those terms of art in your searches to find at least one other article. So yeah, I'll just post them here. They're in that file as well.
Yes. So in the Discord, y'all, if you're both looking at the Zoom and looking at the Discord, all these things have been linked, instructions and activity. So definitely check that out. Y'all have quite a few things to do now in your free time. If you're a PST, you got, you know, a large portion of your day to do this. If you're EST, you still have a large portion of your day to do this. Please make sure that you're check marking off all of the assignments that have been given out. Tag and book your consultants for office hours this weekend so that we can judge these. Well, not me, I guess, but like so that they can judge these spars. And getting ready for the demo debate tomorrow. As well as I think there's 2 lectures that people signed up for that are happening tomorrow as well. So you got some things to do. So thank you so much, Greg. Y'all clap for Greg. Say thank you. All of that great stuff. I think that this was completely invaluable. This is a tool for y'all to use.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Bye.
Now, yeah, we'll talk about it. But yeah, cool.
Perfect. I will end.
I have a question about the spars. Like, so I've gotten like, well, I don't know if I was supposed to like steal the highlighting from like the demo debates.
Can you make me the host, Greg? Sorry. Greg, can you make me the host? Sorry, Neon. Can you make me the host so I can end the stream?
Wait, sorry.
Sorry, I was like, can you make me the host so I can end the stream?
Oh, yeah.